He's in town. Eventually, I just started to step back in the road. People just big stuff. Yeah. Focus on that. Good. Good. The other thing is too, great for that if you're out there. Yeah. What the fact of that is, and then you see the pothole on the sidewalk. People got some good on around. They're paying you to have as much come back. Right. Just smile and go on and go it up and down and down. Who said that? When did they say we didn't do that? I just met them on Wednesday and shit. That's what love is. Yeah, what is the message from?
Okay, it is 5:30. We're here for the Budget Committee meeting, our July meeting, but first we have the public hearing, the first of two public hearings on the budget. We filed the appropriate notice and published it in the paper, so we will now start that public hearing. I'll talk just generally and say we're still in the process of approving the budget. I believe, Comptroller, that our goal is to approve it by the end of this month. Is that correct? July?
Yes.
Yes, as we are required to do by statute. And so we've been working on this, and now tonight we'll have, let's see, the second draft, third draft? Second draft in more detail. But want to start with the opportunity for public comment here. So at this point, I'll stop, and then we'll have some comments from the Comptroller and anyone else who might want to share comments. And then from there, we can go into our regular Budget Committee meeting. So at this point, are there any public comments on the budget as part of the public hearing? Seeing none, Comptroller, would you be able to kind of give us the Reader's Digest version of where we are now, and then we can have opportunities for comments or questions thereafter?
Yes, absolutely. We will be going over this, obviously, in much greater detail during the budget meeting, but the big change, I would say, from where we were a month ago when we met to where we are today is that we have ascertained some idea of what we think we need for the general fund from the ARPA money. that we've had so many meetings about. We know that the general fund slice of the ARPA money is only a piece of what we need. We have so much more restoration to do with that money for our community, but we also know that if we don't settle the foundation on the city side, we won't be able to give those deliverables that our community is expecting of us to make sure that we can get those programs and those services out to the people who need them. So we, tonight we'll show you in detail that we added $1,591,000 from the ARPA money out of our total. Remember, will be $15 million when it's all said and done. We did receive, of course, half of that already. And that is what we believe will need to aid the COVID restoration efforts on the general fund side, supporting the efforts of the city to then carry out what needs to be done with the remainder of that money on this side. In general, I would say that it was, as far as the budget goes for the hearing, it has been nice to be able to add revenues for the first time in a long time. That was actually a very detailed and time-consuming process this year. Obviously, last year we were in the decreasing revenues mode with COVID, and this time I could put that back to where the levels we thought they would be. Also, we have some really nice revenue coming in from the fire department with their ambulance services, and Chief LaRoche and I have had many conversations about some of the additional revenues that we can place on the general fund ledger from the ambulance services. So that's a huge piece this year. We believe that we will be able to bring in approximately $700,000 more. So really the expenses, just in summary, the additional expenses are either ARPA related with items we believe we're going to need for this upcoming year, or they are simply the standard increases we're used to. Retro payments for contracts, standard salary increases that are contractually driven, insurances, workers' comp insurance, liability insurance, medical insurance. All of those are the major expense drivers that we have going into the upcoming fiscal year. Those are typically the ones we have every single year.
Thank you, Comptroller Kubel. At this point, is there any other questions, or Mayor, do you have any comments you want to share at this point? Members of the committee, anything you want to share? Or anyone else? Okay. Well, at this point, we will close the public hearing and move into our regular July budget meeting, the Budget Committee. Is there any public comment as we begin the Budget Committee meeting? Seeing none, we'll call roll. Alderwoman Cherry Malone Marshall?
Here.
Alderman O'Brien here. Alderman Osinga?
Right.
Alderman Marzak? Here. Alderwoman Lewis?
Here.
Alderwoman Johnson?
Here.
And Alderman Brown?
Here.
Okay, we do have a quorum, and there's no presentation or old business. The new business begins with a review of the budget, and you started that. Comptroller, do you want to just continue from there in the more detail? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Basically, when you go to the second draft of the budget, you don't have very many sheets tonight. I feel like I've worked way more than the pieces of paper in front of you this evening, most certainly. But the second draft here that we're looking at tonight, if I have highlighted that line item, it means that I have made a change along in consultation with department heads and or the mayor, that we have a change. So if it is not highlighted, that means that it's identical to how you saw it last month. I think it's just kind of easy to keep it simple. So like for instance, underneath revenue additions and reductions, number 1 through 10 are identical to how we had it the last time you saw the first draft. The first change comes on number 11, which is increase to ambulance fees. And the reasoning is still the same. We are having higher volume. We are a part of the GEMNET program, as Chief LaRoche and I have talked about so often. But after careful analysis of what we brought on in the month of May and what we brought on in the month of June, that's all for services rendered prior to April 30th, we brought in another, I believe it was $331,000 in May and June, all with dates of service April 30th and before. So the last time we showed you an actual number on fire, I believe it was 1.65 million for the year, 1.6 we'll say, somewhere in there. Now add in your minds another $331,000 to that from last year. So we will just be shy in actuals this year about, when we get all those items wrapped up, about $2 million. We budgeted last year $1 million. So we showed you last month on the first draft that we needed to increase that $600,000 to capture the true revenue that's coming in for this program. After consulting with Chief LaRoche and looking at those May and June numbers that just happened, I feel very comfortable with still being conservative, but adding an additional $100,000 to that number. So then instead of our budget being what it'll end up being, last month we showed you 1.6 million, now we're going to put 1.7 million in the budget for fiscal '22. So that's the first change on number 11. It's higher by $100,000. Items 12 through 19 had no change from our last draft. And then item 20 is the main item that I alluded to when we had the budget hearing just a few moments ago. Increase of the ARP revenue to aid the COVID restoration efforts. I should have taken the TBD off. I'm sorry, I left that on there. We have determined that amount now, and we have determined that amount to be $1,591,000 for the city of Kankakee. At this point, with that particular line item, I would like to jump over to this other sheet that I gave to you that looks like this. It's a single sheet entitled American Rescue Plan Act at the top of it. We, of course, would never throw a number on there and not give you the detail as to how we came up to that number. In general, in discussions with the mayor and from the meetings that we have been to, we decided to break the ARPA money, as we're calling it, into 3 categories for the general fund. Obviously, when we talk about ARPA for the city, it is much, much more comprehensive than that. But really, for the general fund, we felt like there were 3 main areas. The first area is what's listed there on number 1, revenue recovery from fiscal '21 due to the COVID economy. We are being highly conservative here with these numbers. We only chose 3 of the major taxes that we know we came up short with in COVID. We chose charitable games tax, sales tax 1%, and then of course our sales tax 2%. Between those items, when you compare it to the year before, when we had a solid year, a full year, which would have been of course fiscal '20, these are the numbers that we would have budgeted had we not known COVID was going to happen. You've got to remember that when we came and sat down in these very chambers a year ago, we were well into COVID. You know, COVID came on strong in March. We're having budget talks starting in June. We didn't end up passing it till August. We kind of had a little bit of a grasp on COVID, and we made prudent decisions accordingly. You all made prudent decisions accordingly and said, yes, we agree. Sales tax is going to be down. Gaming is going to be down. We know that these things are going to happen. So we made those decisions accordingly. But most of the items I've read try to take you off of like a base year. So when you go off of a base year, you look at what you would have brought in. And we simply had done that 2-prong approach, which we've talked about so much. So of course, the piece that was for trending data that we knew was lower, there is no ARPA money being used for that. That wouldn't be right, because we knew that our trends for sales tax were lower going into COVID. The only piece that we're making up for here is what we thought would have been affected because of COVID. Those are the dollars we're asking for. And remember, from the last meeting, we ended up really close with those estimates. But we actually lost more revenue than that because we had already made an amendment when we took that to pass last summer. So these are those numbers there. And between those 3 items, as you can see on the list, it totals $506,000 for the first piece of our plan for the ARPA money in the general fund. The second item is a little bit more of an estimate, I would say. I labeled that possible revenue recovery from fiscal '22, the budget we're looking at tonight, due to the COVID economy. We have had many conversations in this room regarding property taxes, landlords, what's going to happen if you didn't have a job. You know, can you make your payments? Are you going to pay for your taxes? You know, we've had these conversations. The reality is that none of us really know what's going to happen this year. The mayor did have a good conversation with the treasurer, and collections have been good thus far, but good thus far through June and good when we close the books in December are quite typically different stories. And quite honestly, on good years, sometimes we still don't collect all the property taxes. I mean, many years we've collected 95%, 96%, 97%. Well, when you're talking about millions and millions of dollars, you know, $13, $14 million, if If you lose 3 to 4%, that really starts to add up. Will I be able to attribute it perfectly to COVID? No. But do we know that that element is still out there and we know that it's affecting people? Absolutely. We've had reports from Barbie, I remember one from Alden Barron as well, that these are real conversations and real meetings that they're having right now with landlords and such who aren't collecting. And we don't know what that outcome is going to be. I hope everyone can pay their property tax bill, and this isn't a necessary item, but I think we all know that the reality is that that's not reality right now. So we have to protect ourselves because we will not know this whole situation until, quite honestly, when I get the last property tax sheet in December. I will not know. So we have to put something in there for that amount. So we just looked at the amounts and said, let's take $500,000 as our protection in case property taxes come up short. If property taxes don't come up short, we don't take the money from ARPA. We can't take it. It's only in the situation that property taxes would come up short would we take something. We just had to pick a number. So that's the number we picked for you all tonight. Yeah, Alderman?
Do we have an idea of what the delinquent taxes were for last year? I mean, for the previous year?
Mm-hmm. Last year was one of the strongest years we'd had in some time. And they believe that mostly is because everything that, for those who escrow, those payments mostly would have been done almost before COVID, right? Because of the way the banks do it and those financial institutions. So we were never super, I remember talking to Chairman O'Brien about that. We were never super worried about last year. The other people who weren't as affected by COVID, certainly there's people in this room who pay cash for their property taxes. Some of you might have been, some of you may not have been, but a lot of the elderly we know pay cash for their property taxes. They just write a check every year, right? Because they own their homes. A lot of those folks were not affected by COVID as much. Yes, of course, socially and emotionally, but not financially, as their steady stream was still coming in. They weren't going to a workplace to achieve it. So we know that there was a little bit of a security blanket there, for lack of a better phrase, with our groups, with our demographics within our society. And when it was all said and done, I don't have the percentage off the top of my head, but property taxes were very strong last year, very strong. Okay, moving on. Number 3 is the next area, and this is the ARPA assistance to restore the city post-COVID. In the meetings that I've seen all of you at, I feel, especially, I've not been to all of them, but the ones I've been to, when we are talking about this, I'm going to call it the ARPA structure. For us to be able to get these deliverables, these services, these monies, these programs, whatever this is all going to encompass for all of our people who have a COVID need of whatever their need is, I keep hearing one common theme, and it's people. And I know we're going to need people to structure this. Our existing people, my office, Barbie's office, mayor's office, all of our existing departments, fire, police, everybody is going to still be needed. But they're going to be needed on a little bit of a grander level because we're going to be having these deliverables that we can't even, I don't even think, can imagine right now. There is no department that's not being touched by that. We believe that we have to get the city infrastructure from a staffing perspective strong to make sure that we can deliver on the rest of the $7.5 million, eventually that $15 million that we're going to have to spend to get to our people. We don't want to be in a position where we didn't use the government's money for our people. And if we don't, I believe, and the mayor believes, if we don't set this up properly from the beginning, we could be in that position. Because $15 million really is a lot of money. That's a lot of money for us. And we're not looking at giving it away in $1 million chunks. Tonight is the rarity. I think a lot of these programs that are going to be designed will be, we're going to be working with a $300,000 chunk or a $500,000 chunk maybe of different funds for different programs and different needs. But these big pieces of it are not going to be often. So this structure is going to take a lot of manpower and woman power to get accomplished. So that's kind of the basis of this number 3. Within that, we believe, and Mayor, step in at any time if you need to, with letter A, the assistance for the code department, addition of staff, we know that for, I don't remember the number of months now, but we know that for almost the better part of 1 full year, the code department was not allowed to do their jobs. They couldn't do inspections. They signed off on permits as they could, but the COVID restrictions really really restricted them from doing their job. We know that the city has work to do there. We have catch-up work to do there, and they need people to get that accomplished and get things caught up here in the city of Kankakee. So they have needed staff replacements naturally, and this just seems like the perfect place to say, we are behind because of COVID. Let's use some of those funds to get us back on target with the code department. Anything to add to that?
A lot of, they're way behind right now. Last year, there was no rental license inspections. I mean, I shouldn't say no, but there were several months where we didn't have the rental license inspections going on. We didn't have a lot of other inspections for them. It's trying to catch up. There were 3 code officers right now trying to service 7 wards without basically saying, forget everything that was done in the past or just start from fresh. And even then, they still wouldn't have enough, I'll call it, labor pool to get what's needed to come done, including with vacant houses and vacant lots and that. So we just thought this is an area that can help structure the public safety and the housing stock to let them be able to do the work that they need to do to accurately do everything they need to do each day and to get caught up on that, because they're running behind on everything right now. I'm sure as a lot of the aldermen know, 3 code officers right now in 7 wards almost is impossible for them to keep up for each of them doing. So this is an option to try and get them to 6. They feel like they could, with 6 code officers, they could handle 7 wards adequately to go forward. Yes.
So this doesn't give them that administrative assistant that takes care of that paperwork.
These are code people, code officers and those in the field.
There's a need for that also in the code office too. So I'd be happy to talk about,
Sure.
I didn't want to come here and sit there and say, when Elizabeth kind of put some of these numbers together, you see this number here and you go, oh, it's a big number, it takes you back. I think that's what I want to have tonight is this discussion, because we do have to help ourselves, the city of Kankakee first. I mean, not first, but we have to help the city of Kankakee along with everything else that we want to do with this money. So I'm open to those ideas. If the council is open to some of that additional help and assistance, by all means. I'm looking at also just, this is in the general operating budget. This is, I'll call it people and employees. But we've also talked before, we need to help the code department with technology to do a more efficient job with the people that they have, and we're looking at some of that COVID money. That'll be a discussion also of how we can make them more efficient than just old school. But to your point, Alderwoman Malone-Marshall, I'm open to your suggestions. I just didn't want to come here and say, well, it's 3.2 million, I mean, that would just throw everybody back to 1.5 million, throws me back a little bit. But you're absolutely right. They do need, not only that department, probably lots of departments need some assistance. So as we talk about tonight, I'm open to all ideas.
Thank you, Mayor. When I'm looking at this, I see addition of staff, like in the police department, 2 people, and in fire department, 3 people. That's civilian, or is that firefighter, police officer personnel?
That's personnel.
Yeah, do you want me to just keep going down the list and explain? Yeah, do you want me just to keep going down the letters and explain each one? Okay, let's do that. And then if you still have questions, then at that time, for sure.
I know we're down 10 police officers.
Right.
Salary-wise.
Right. So, yeah, okay.
Maybe I'll understand.
Yeah, maybe, and you may still have questions. So basically, police and fire, moving on to B and C if we're done with letter A. Just with police and fire is certainly, we have the situation Alderman Ozinga just spoke about that we know about. We're down in fire, we're down in police, we're just down. And we know that some of that is natural attrition. We have had people stay, a lot of people have stayed for 30 years. That's wonderful. And they started to retire. A lot of our public safety officers really only have to stay 20. And a lot of the ones hitting that 20-year mark are now saying, you know what, it's been great, I'm out of here. And now we have this storm of 30-year employees leaving and 20-year employees leaving all at the same time. And in different committee meetings, I've been a part of this discussion for quite some time now, and we know this is happening. However, the piece we can't quantify, that we cannot ask in an exit interview, that we cannot explicitly grab is, was this going to happen before COVID? Like, was this all perfectly planned? Or has COVID helped to move some of this along? We know that they are essential employees, and we know that COVID was a lot. And you can't help but believe that COVID is a part of it. Do I think it's the main part of it? No, I do not. But COVID is definitely a part of it. We also have employees then now who didn't take time off or who had to take time off. And that's all COVID related as well, and just different initiatives that the departments are trying to get accomplished. So we believe that in all good faith, with these deliverables we're talking about for these programs we want to do, with public safety being so essential, that we could reimburse ourselves two police department staff and 3 fire department staff of folks that we can get helping us with our mission here at the city, helping us ultimately do those deliverables and work through that process with COVID money. We believe that that is important to do, that they are essential employees.
Make a comment. This is above and beyond the current staffing.
Correct.
That they are projected to have already. So I'll give a good example. Fire department, correct me if I'm wrong, Chief, was at 46. I think you just had a officer or a firefighter leave, correct? So now you're down to 45. Ideally, I think they would love to see a 5 in that number, but we were trying to get it to 49 is where we were trying to get to. So this 3 is above and beyond what they are currently projected for staffing. And the same with police. Why police is down 10, well, as of today, 11, because we had another retirement today. This is above and beyond where they're trying to get to. So this isn't just, I'll give a good example. This isn't to try and get the fire department from 46 and an extra 3, which would give them the 49. They're short 1 right now where they're currently staffed at, so they would hopefully be looking to hire 4 new firefighters to get them to a staffing of 49.
Depleted levels.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any questions on those two?
That was my question.
Yeah. Where they're supposed to be at now, this is above and beyond that.
The answer to Alderman Ozinga's question was sworn personnel we're talking
Correct.
about. All right, okay, thank you.
Yes.
And we think that will also help with overtime also. We're seeing it with the frontline workers, with the police and fire, them being not only down on staff after COVID, they continued working. There was no time off for them, and we're seeing after a year and stuff, there a lot of overtime. We're seeing that in the budget. We're also seeing it just in, I'll call it even maybe a little bit of mental. They're tired with working the extra overtime. So this is trying to pull that back and give them a little bit of a more man and woman power to give them a little bit more break so they're not so overburdened.
All right, moving on to letter D, assistance for the legal/adjudication department. To Alderwoman Malone Marshall's point for maybe potentially additional staffing in code, we know that if we are hiring more code officers, there's going to be more work. And right now in the adjudication/legal department, there are 2 individuals who work in a full-time capacity, and we've got we have in-house counsel, of course, in Mary Lou Norwell, and they are very busy right now, assisting, of course, that front window and the cases and the tickets and all those types of things that they're working through, because that office adjudication processes those items. So with that, we want to give the option that potentially we might need to bulk the staff up there and add a staff member, not tomorrow, but possibly if the activity picks up the way we anticipate, that we are properly staffed in that area to be able to handle those situations that were all overlooked during the COVID time when we weren't doing the things we should have been doing. Okay? That's a prorated salary on that with benefits attached, so you can clearly see that that's not going to be hired tomorrow at $30,000 for the year. Okay? E, assistance for the Human Resource Department. This is the same exact logic almost, is that if we are bringing in possible community navigators and building up staffs to deliver these programs and the deliverables, as I talked about so often tonight, Carolyn is a one-woman show. She is amazing, and it's been a joy to work with her again. But that is a lot. When you are screening people, interviewing folks, you are doing all of that as one person in an 8-hour day. It's a lot. So she really could use some assistance there in that department to help with those efforts and also other efforts that she's been working on. So that was layered in here. And F and G are just simply possible reimbursements. It was just an idea that I had shared with the mayor. I feel with the development of these programs and the development of having to pay for these people and programs at both legal and accounting, my department will be very tasked with we'll have new jobs. And it just seemed only proper that there is some reimbursement to the legal department and to the comptroller's department for those jobs being done. We just picked 15% for legal, which equates to $45,000 off of those dollars there, and 5% from accounting. We did not account for very much there, but we felt like that was fair to do that with the fact that, that work will be additional and totally COVID-related work. The total then comes to, for this year, is that $1,591,000 that we just looked at in the second draft, but I thought it would be important to understand our thinking so we can have more discussion on this when we get through the rest of this second draft. Alderwoman?
I have a question, and we may not be there yet, but, so I'm looking at this one, and we have reduction to legal expenses there, roughly $66,000. But it looks like then we're going to add $75,000, roughly, maybe from this page, back to legal expenses.
There's only $25,000 being taken from legal at this point in time.
Okay.
The 66 is for all of them.
Okay.
And then the reimbursement is the $45,000 for us just taking care of ourselves in our COVID efforts.
Well, it did that, and then the legal for adjudication as well.
Yeah, that's really, I put legal adjudication because they support Mary Lou, but really that's an adjudication expense, quite honestly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but in my head, they kind of wipe each other out, like, that.
Right, I understand.
Does that
I
make
understand.
sense?
But if we don't show them separate, the whole puzzle doesn't come together. Because what I do from this sheet then, when we say tonight, we hash it out, and we say, yeah, Elizabeth, this is great, that's great, but I don't know about this, and I don't know about this, Mayor. When we get done with this sheet tonight, then I take these dollar amounts and apply them to general ledger line items. So out of this perfect example, the top of additional expenses is at $425,000, which is the retro payments for contracts, and it's also raises that are contractual. That 425 gets divided out over about 18 line items. But when it's all said and done and I add all those back up again, it's got to equal 425 because I showed you right here that's all we're raising it. So does that make sense? So if I don't show every single piece of the puzzle, we won't get to the right total when I go back to put it on the line items. So it is, I understand what you're saying. It is a little confusing for sure. But if I miss telling you about $30,000, then it won't be right because I take this sheet and I highlight it and I put it on the line it goes on. And then I take the next one and do it because otherwise I've showed you ultimately when we sell here tonight, whatever the surplus, is going to be, I show you that number. And when I bring you back that ordinance to pass, it better say that same number because that's what you all agreed on tonight. Sometimes we have some slight modifications if I catch something that I didn't think of, like a copier expense or something like that. But it better be pretty close to what was the final passage here because that's what you all decided on. So I have to have all the pieces in there. I hope that makes sense. Good.
Before we move on, Alderman Malone Marshall, you mentioned with code, it sounds like you could see some more help there with the administration. Is that what you're looking for there? With some thoughts?
Yeah, that's what I was looking for, additional, maybe two code officers and then pick us on one administrative assistant so that we can make sure the paperwork is taken care of also.
And it could break out that way too. I know in talking to Director Nelson, ideally you'd love to have 7, that'd be perfect world. We said, I kind of mentioned, I don't see how we could ever get there. 6 would be perfect. I kind of told her, if we could at least get to 5, not knowing where we were 30, 45 days ago in the budget.
Right.
So, that 3 could be, we could talk to Director Nelson about how she thinks that 3 should break out.
Yes,
So.
she and I still have to meet on the minor line items this week. But salary-wise, we can certainly have that
It
conversation.
seems more efficient that way we can too, so that's why we, originally that's why we put 3 in there, not knowing if it's 3 or 2, seeing how this all shakes out, so. Okay.
I would like her to, make the determination.
Sure.
That's how.
In her world, she would love to have she had 6 code officers, that'd be great. And probably meant, but we can let her talk here. This would give her 6, but maybe it is better with 5 code officers and an assistant or something. So we can talk different ways with her there. We just wanted to try and get it into the budget for her.
So basically then that whole section, the middle section, expenses and reductions, about 2/3 of the way down on the sheet, that is identically being presented tonight as it was presented to you all a month ago, with the same decreases that we showed then. There were no changes to that. Moving into additional expenses, much more work has been done on that salary, number 1, which is the contractual salary increases, the 2%-ish, and the retro pay. I did take some general salary numbers from last year, added in percentages a little bit more than that actually, because you got to remember with step increases with some of the contracts and such, you don't always just get a 2% raise. If you move up in a step or longevity, you might get a little bit more depending on where you're at in that process. So all of that's being taken into play. The critical piece, you all have never seen this. Some of you have been here for years. You've never seen me give you a number that says $425,000 before for this. A lot of that is driven by the police retroactive money that is going to be owed to them because they are now in arrears with their contract pushing 15 months. And we haven't gone back to the table yet. So by the time they settle, in all reality, I know they're anxious to come into the table, but by the time we settle, it could easily be 18 months. And I've got to make sure that money is all encapsulated in this budget. So that's why that number is so high, because when we were talking about our patrol, that's a lot of folks that'll be entitled to retroactive pay. And remember too, if they retired, they're still entitled to it. So we have to make sure that we're solid on that. So I did recheck that number though, and it's a solid number. Nothing else changed except for number 5. I did put in parentheses there in red that ARPA, just so that you know that's the same $120,000 we were talking about with code, just to kind of make that connection. All the other items were the same until you get to 9, which is the additional expense for liability insurance. That is still an estimate, but we did get that number solidified, as you well know, and we were able to take, last month I presented $400,000. This month we really only need to add $100,000 to it with the real number of where we are. That also includes our deductibles when we have a situation and we have to pay some deductibles. That allows not only for premium costs, but also for deductible costs. So that's all been included inside of that number. Okay. 10, 11, and 12, no changes. I do have a tidbit to add to number 12. Although I left that number the same, I just wanted to read these numbers out to you because I believe 2 meetings ago I said I would. Just to give you some idea of the retirements and the buyouts that we've had in just the police department. I didn't even look at other departments. In January through April of this year, so just 4 months of the previous fiscal year, we had $391,145 in police department buyouts only in 4 months. Since May of this year, this new fiscal year, we've got 2 pending that are upcoming here in the next couple of weeks with some retirements like Mayor alluded to today. We will be at $254,730 in just the police department by the end of this month, since May. So as you can see, this is not going away. We are obviously pushing $700,000 for the calendar year right now. So putting in $300,000 right now for retirement buyouts doesn't even seem like enough by any stretch. We have to do something. I can't predict every retirement. I've certainly, as we do here, hear rumblings, but I can't do anything solid off of a rumbling. Right now, this includes everybody that I have been told is retiring, and that's about the best I can do right now. So obviously, we are, with salaries and such, we have budgets that had 40, I think last year, I think we thought there was 48, I did not go back in there, but there were at least 47, right? We decided in your budget last year, I think, Chief? 48. I'm sorry? 48. So he's clearly not at 48 today, as we just talked about. So that'll give us a little cushion in his department. Just like Alderman Ozinga said, we are not at full staff in police department. The budget says that we have a full staff there. We do not. So I think we have some inherent cushions, but I don't think we should add any more in here for buyouts, although I promise you that number is going to be bigger than that when this is all said and done at this point. So just wanted to give you those numbers. Alderman?
Yeah, I'm going to ask one question. Maybe it's in here, maybe it's not. We know that because the staff short and we're going to have to recruit, go back through testing, go back through all the other things we need to do. Is that in here already?
Not yet, we haven't seen it yet. Flip the page.
Oh.
Can I go back to number 6? Is that part of it? No, that's not part of it. No, sorry.
It's 20, it's number 11, I'm sorry, I thought it was 13. It's number 11, additional expense for the Police and Fire Commission. We're adding $20,000 to their budget because of the additional testing that they're doing. Number 11, right at the bottom of the page, one up from the retirement buyouts. So we had that $20,000 in there, they're going to need every bit of it to get their testing done.
That's for the additional testing. They're going to have to, both police and fire are going to have to go back out for testing in this fiscal year again, so that was the increase for the additional $20,000.
So we're not touching a dime or cutting anything there, we're just adding to it.
The other thing is too, is that we know that once special police, once they get the job, they also have to go to the academy. And it used to be it was paid for, but now we have to pay for it. Is that in here too?
So I didn't put anything additional in for that. I believe last year, and I don't have Chief here, but I think we had 2 in the budget last year. But I'm going to make a note about that. That's a good point. That's not something I've looked at again for a couple months, so I probably need to look at that again. So I will definitely do that. Yeah, because they've had a lot of lobbying going on to help the state pay for that again, because departments are so depleted, but nothing has come through. You're exactly right.
Comptroller, question. The 2 that are in the academy now, is that last fiscal year or this fiscal year's?
I believe we paid that.
That was last fiscal year.
I believe last fiscal year, yeah.
And we'll have 3 going in August.
Yeah, I'm a little frightened we only have 2 in the budget right now, but I'm going to have to check on that.
And I know he did reserve 3 for next spring and 3 for next fall.
Right, so we really need to
So you
hold
could have
6 slots.
6 slots you
And I
could
think
have
we
for
could have
training
2 versus
for
6,
this
so,
fiscal
okay.
year.
No, that's a great point, I'm going to look at that. That's why we have these meetings, because it's hard to remember everything. Thank you. Flipping to page 2. A lot more shading here. Number 13 is shaded, but only partially, because it says additional firefighters 3. I did put that as part of the ARPA, as you can see. So that kind of changed in title, and I think we may have only said 2 firefighters the last time, and this is 3 now. But the dollars stayed the same because we've been marching on in time, and we know that as much as Chief LaRoche and Deputy Chief Hyde want firefighters tomorrow, we know for a fact that they won't have them tomorrow. So unfortunately, we were able to use that kind of time on our side and kind of project that money out, making 3 then instead of just the 2. Okay? That's benefits and everything rolled up in there, of course, not just salaries. 14 and 15 are identically the same. We are looking at some measures, though, as you all know. All the phone expense and data expenses for the city go through the comptroller's department. And several of those have gone up substantially in the last couple of years. I just today actually spoke with Chief LaRoche and worked with somebody in my department. We got a few things we would like to tweak, so we're hoping maybe we're not going to need all of that $30,000, but I feel like from a budget perspective, we do still need to increase it because obviously our needs and reliance on technology is not going to lessen in any near future. So I think that would be appropriate to meet the budget where we are now. Starting with 16 and down, number 16 is the additional expense of the GemNet consultant from fiscal 2021. This came out about, I think, 6 weeks ago or so. Chief LaRoche and I had a meeting, and he said, you know, Elizabeth, we owe quite a large bill to the GemNet consultant that was used before with obtaining that money. And I remember we passed that. I remembered that here. I remembered talking to former Chief Scholl about it very vividly. I never remembered any dollars attached to it. I don't know where the block was for me on that or why I didn't think, why haven't we paid that yet? I obviously had a disconnect with this subject, but there is not a disconnect now, and we certainly owe, I believe, $84,000 and some change for the consulting firm that was used last year. Now, just at the last meeting, you all made changes to that billing structure, as Chief LaRoche talked to you about. So our billing structure ongoing is different. with how that's going to be, it's all kind of encompassed together, correct, Chief?
Yes.
So we have a different structure going forward, which will be much more cost effective. So this is a one-time charge. Once it's paid, it's done. But I wanted to make sure that we account for that because that's a lot of money that we did not have anywhere in a budget. And unfortunately, it's going to get paid this fiscal year so that we can wrap up with this company. It's not going to get paid last fiscal year. So I just want to make sure we accounted for that. Number 17 is putting the additional expense in for a full year of a city planner. Rough numbers, that equates to, here of course, 92,000, but remember we had 52,000 in the budget from last year, so I'm adding 92 to it. That brings the total to $144,000, of which that's about roughly 12,000 per month, which we've been exceeding here recently, but obviously there's been lots of work done with the Jeffers projects. We've had lots of planning hearings and so forth, so the goal would be that number comes down quite a bit, but when you're setting a budget, you want to make sure it's something that is trending, and to make sure that it's trending, I felt only confident with doing the 12,000 per month. So that is the money there. Did you have something to say?
And this is paying for it out of the general operating budget versus out of
Correct.
capital?
Correct.
So,
Correct.
before it was being budgeted that we paid for the planner out of capital. And I just, as like a lot of employees, just feel that's something that should be a line item in the general budget going forward instead of out of capital or along that line. So this is basically putting the city planner expense in the general operating budget of the city of Kankakee versus paying it out of capital.
Yeah, for a full year. Yep. And then the last two are items we already spoke about with the additional police officers, that ARPA money, and then the additional support in the Human Resources Department. So when you add all that together, the additional revenues, the reductions, and then the additional expenses, the grand total comes out to $481,608.11, which is interesting. I'll round that off later. The amount then when you take out the home rule sales tax, so remember up here at the very, very beginning, we have a slight increase to home rule sales tax of $56,340. When you take that out just to look at what's going to be general fund truly, then you're looking at about $481,000. With the home rule, you're looking at $425,000. Remember, the majority of that surplus, of course, is that property tax money, that $500,000 that right now we don't know if we're going to need or not. So I got it as close as I could to that $500,000, knowing though that we might need to use some of that depending on how the year finishes. So really that's mostly, to me, I see that as the placeholder for that money. What questions do you have or discussion points? There's a lot. Never done a budget with ARPA money before, let me tell you. Done a lot of them, but not this kind. I think Chairman said, Carl.
I think you first, I can't say.
Adding additional personnel, that's going to save us on the overtime, but how many ambulances, working ambulances do we have? It's 2 or 3?
There's 2 on the road right now, and we have 2 in reserve.
So we have one, basically 2 full-time, correct?
Yes.
So out of this ARPA money, is it possible, would we benefit by adding an additional ambulance? We already have the personnel that's qualified to be on those ambulances. Do we contract out with anybody else?
The way it works is if we have 3 ongoing ambulance calls, we send in-district fire engine, this ALS engine, and we will bring either Riverside or Superior ambulance to transport.
So would it benefit us to have more ambulances on,
Well, that's unfortunately. Financially, it will cost the city, but the extra ambulance in service, but we will recover the cost for those ambulance transports. I haven't ran the numbers this year yet, but I know that we do turn over, I would say somewhere around 20, 30 calls a month, possibly to other ambulance services. Without doing a real good look at the numbers, it's hard to say whether it's cost effective or not.
Alderman Brown, had a question?
I have a question. I guess my question goes back to years and years and years. We have some capital money that basically we bond for. With some of the COVID money that we're using, and we talk about moving code down to the new building and tying in code adjudication and somebody else, are we now have the money for the infrastructure, for the software and all that stuff, to tie all that together in this budget, or is that something that we're going to have to wait on for another year?
Correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
but that would come out of capital.
Yeah.
Or that would be used from COVID money to do that. That wouldn't come out of the general operating fund that's this budget here. So that the Bow Brothers building is one that we're going to have to look at, because you're right, that might be a piece that we look at from some of the COVID situation, because there is some over expenditures there, but it's tied into code and sewer services, which would be eligible under COVID. So that may be something that we have to look at when we have our meetings of that pot of money, of having used some of that money to finalize the infrastructure that needs to be done there. But that's, I guess that's outside of the general operating budget, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah, the software never would have been general fund, but your comments couldn't be more poignant, because we are so overdue with connectivity between our departments. And I think, too, the potentially suggested increases in staff would give us extra hands to implement such a system, too, because just having modernized one little system with payroll this last year in my department, that was all-encompassing, because we were so behind. And this, I have a feeling that when we go to modernize with this type of software, which, as we've looked at before, I mean, it looks phenomenal, wherever we land with it, that's going to take every single department in the city to get that going. I mean, there's no department that, some will do it less, like my department honestly will probably be the least involved, but I'm looking around the room at my coworkers here, and there's nobody who's not going to be touched by this. With that implementation and making sure that their piece is right with when we have to blend all that in. I don't have formal IT training, obviously, and it is a lot to bring in a modern system when you have been in I'm just going to call it the dark ages for so long. We just haven't had the money. This isn't any one mayor's fault or anything. We haven't had the money to spend on such a thing. And now we did. We made that a priority with that capital money. We might have been blessed and be able to use different money for it. But regardless, the time is near for us to be discussing that, in my opinion.
Thank you. Following up on Alderman Brown's, go ahead, Alderman Walmart, go ahead. Somewhat related, you're saying the ARPA money that we spend on things like that would be outside of the operating budget, like we're talking here.
Correct.
Procedurally, does that we just approve those on a as-we-go basis? So every time there's, okay, we're going to spend $500,000 on this, we just get council approval?
I assume we would still follow all of our own processes for such, endeavors.
There'd be no really other way to do that, really?
I don't know of any. I've not consulted with legal on this. It just seems like it should follow something of what is kind of normal for us. I agree with you.
Just making that question made me think of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Alderman Malone Marshall?
I just have a question. So now, I know the 15% and the 5% reimbursement, that's like for 1 year. But for the additional staff, that will be for the next 4 years coming out of the ARPA?
This is just for 1 year. So next year, we come back, we're sitting here at the same time. Maybe we have some tweaks. Maybe code gets a whole bunch done with these extra people. And we say, you know what? Code's good. Like, we can just support at the same level. Or maybe the EAV goes up so much in our city. I mean, being positive that we get some of these other things we've been doing online. Maybe we're like, we don't need as much of this ARPA money for it. Or maybe we say we barely even touched it right now with what we want to get done, and maybe we need to take a little bit more next year. This is just one singular year. So we'll look at a sheet, I would assume something like this next year, and be talking about the next $7.5 million.
From a timing perspective, do you envision that we would approve or consider the budget at our next meeting, a week from tonight?
unless something goes drastically wrong this week, and I've had my fill here lately, not here at work, but personally, I would suspect that we are wanting to pass this in the month of July.
On track, okay.
Yeah, and get this accomplished, get a budget in place, get all the new things.
Comptroller, is a way to look at the $500,000 for property tax really, I mean, is that essentially the range of what you're thinking we might not hit?
I think that's the absolute most we would have to use. I mean, if Treasurer's words hold true, which I would assume he has a good pulse on that, I can't imagine it would be $500,000 full dollars for the general fund. That seems crazy to me. But I felt like we had to have some type of a placeholder because we keep talking about this fall and what it's going to look like and what we think is going to happen. And I just feel like it would be completely irresponsible of us to not put some type of value on that. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope when these dollars come in, I show you guys a sheet and we're short $99,000 and that's all we need to take from the ARPA money. I hope that that's how it goes, but I don't know.
And that's why you don't have a revenue addition or reduction for property taxes is because
Right.
that's the range there.
Right. That's why the surplus is close to 500, because for that reasoning that I don't know if we're going to need it or not. And I don't want to put a reduction in because I don't even know where to stab that apple. You know, I mean, we could do 2% like we've had in the past. That might be a decent average. We could maybe do that. I can look at that for sure. At least go off of where we've been trending. You know, look at that. It's not going to be a COVID number, but at least it's a number. You know, and then we could put an offset in for that, making the surplus much smaller. We could definitely do that.
But this seems, I mean, it gives you a lot of flexibility, so.
Yeah.
That's good in my book. I don't want to make this into an ARP committee meeting or anything like that, but because you asked about staffing, I just wanted to raise that we've had two strong economic development and community development meetings where we've come across a number of good, I think, areas that we'll be looking to advance some programs, helping seniors, childcare, housing insecurity, jobs programs, youth programs, and then the process of just evaluating more programs. But it seemed like that's an area where we're going to need staffing that increases. And Alderman O'Brien's question about how we might deal with, you know, additional ARP expenditures on a rolling basis, and it sounds like that's what we're going to have to do. So maybe that's where those ECDA added staffing locations might come. But if we're looking at them already, I just want to put in there that seems like an initial expense that we're going to have to deal with some of those programs.
And again, as we go forward with this ARP money, we can make those decisions at any time during the fiscal year. If we wake up in, I'm just picking a date here, November, December, and we say, you know what, we need add staffing level because we just allocated X amount of dollars to a certain thing and we need that. That's, I believe, as we talked about, we could come to council and say, okay, we're going to fund this new position created to satisfy the needs of where we're allocating this money with that money. That's kind of my vision, but going forward. So, because I don't know we know what that is yet until we get there.
Well, and I just can't see, in my mind, and we haven't had full conversation on this, but obviously lots of us have had conversations. If I'm going to use community navigators, I'm going to pick on that subject. If we get a handful of community navigators, I don't believe those would be housed in the general fund. That's not the business of which they're carrying out. They're kind of carrying out the specialty monies that are more housed, that look more like an ECDA or, you know, look like something different. To me, they're not delivering public safety services directly. You know, they're not, you know, making sure the levy comes in. I mean, I feel like our city jobs are pretty defined. And I don't really believe in my heart that community navigators, their work's just very different. You know, this is a whole new social service, I feel like, arrangement that we've never done anything like before. So we probably need to come up with something unique and a structure that's as unique as they are with the mission that they're carrying out. But certainly our HR function, accounting, legal, all that's going to be totally housed within the general fund. So that's why we made those adjustments, you know, to the general fund for those positions. But I think that it is on our ongoing process to those hires and structure.
And going forward, Elizabeth, as you see, a lot of times we have our monthly stuff, we have our separate accounts. She's going to create a separate account for the ARP money, and we'll keep the, kind of like our capital money, you'll see what's there, what has been spent, what the current balance is, and we'll do the same thing, correct, with the
Yeah.
ARP money.
Yeah.
So you'll see that separately lined item as we navigate over the next 4 years.
Yeah. When it landed, we just had it placed in the capital fund, just for a place for it to land. And now I need to get that moved out of there in its own account so we can have it labeled separately, totally separate. We know everything that came out of it, that type of thing. I don't want to commingle those dollars.
Anyone else? Oh, Lance?
I agree with Alderman Barron, not going to turn this into a ARP meeting, but we recently had a tragedy in the community, and $15 million will go like nothing. We were given, as aldermen and alderwomen, we're given $300,000 per ward to fix our roads. That comes to $4,200,000. And as you know, that went nowhere. I'm just saying we need to put $1 million of that money aside to public safety in regard to that, because it's going to get spent so quick, we will be shaking our heads. But if we can fix our roads, we can fix a lot of things, but public safety, it's a priority of mine. I believe it's a priority of yours. I believe it's a priority of everybody in this room. So whatever that takes, to do that, I believe that should be everything after that. I'm all for economic development. I'm all for spending it in different areas, but we should prioritize that as being public safety.
I concur. There's a lot of dollars that going forward, as we do some programs and different things we do, deciding whether that comes out of capital, whether that comes out of ARP, or where that comes from. But that will be above and beyond the current general operating budget.
Any questions? I had one. You talked about on the budget, page 1, the last line, item 12 there for retirement buyouts.
Sure.
You still think just keeping at 300, that's the way to go? Not knowing?
Yeah, only because going back to that conversation or that question or statement that Alderman Ozinga posed at the last meeting, that we're not taking budgets down at all, and we don't have those people here today. So we have at least, right now in police, I'm going to tell you, at least 10 positions, like Mayor said, 11 now really unfilled, that we still have salaries in there for. They may not be perfectly screwed up with, a union contract that's not new and things like that, but we've got placeholders there, and we don't even have people in those slots. So I feel like there's going to be some balance there, because this is really for the departments that don't have that cushion, quite honestly, because I think police has enough of a cushion. Some of that's probably going to be fires. Fire has some plans for some retirements toward the end of the year. Some of that will probably go there. And then, of course, the ones that as of today, they're the only ones who know they're doing it. We don't know. It's always such a tender subject, because it has to be right for the person. And a lot of times, for whatever reason, some people talk about it, I feel like, for 3 years, and then some people talk about it for a very short amount of time. It's so personal. So a lot of times we just have to do our best estimates based off of what we've been told, what we kind of know through the relationships we have.
Does anyone else have any questions or comments? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much. We will keep working on that and hopefully have a final draft for approval in the next few weeks, if not next week. Also under new business, item 2 is the June financial statements.
Yes, so I put that on the agenda, not really thinking that I usually don't give financial statements until July's business is done. But in my mind, I'm a little frazzled on Friday. I was thinking it was July, but of course July is not finished yet. So I went back to my packet and I looked last year. There were no June financials last year either. So I have nothing to present tonight.
Okay, thank you. Anything under the update, comptroller update?
I don't think so.
No,
We've
we
just been budgeting
covered it
a
all.
lot. Yeah.
Any questions or comments from the committee members? No? Anyone else have any questions or comments? Coach, did you have? We talked briefly about you had potential agenda item. Is there anything you wanted to share on that?
Yeah, we had the bid opening for our refurbishment of Engine 4. We only had one bidder, and that was McQueen. Their bid came in at right number for you, $383,125. That's for corrosion repair and a little bit of additional to what we had already thought we needed on the vehicle. That's a high number. We're hoping that we can get that number down from some reductions of some of the costs that we don't think we possibly really need on this vehicle. But we're looking to get approval probably the next meeting we can for public safety. The next city council meeting.
Are you looking to put that on the upcoming city council meeting a week from tonight, or are you looking to take that through public safety first, or what's your thoughts there?
Well, it's whatever. I believe we were going to go through budget. I must have not got this on the agenda for tonight's meeting. I was hoping to get the approval from the budget committee, but instead of public safety, it's going to both committees to get this approved, and then go to city council, yes, for next week. That was the hope.
So you already went to public safety?
No, public safety was canceled last week.
Okay.
So a week from tonight, you're not talking about that city council meeting, the first one in August? Is that what you envision?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so you're looking for the first meeting in August to take that to,
Yes.
When's the next public safety meeting?
the night after.
Oh.
You're trying to get the number reduced? Is that?
Well, we have what the deal is with them. That's what his bid came in at, with what we have on the list. What's going to happen is those going to go to the shop. They're going to take it all apart. They're going to say, okay, this is what it needs to be completed. What we'll do is look at that number, maybe cut some things off the list that we want to get fixed to make that number more palatable. $383,000 is basically right around the realm where we probably should be with the possible increase in cost of things that they need to do. Once they take it apart and look at it, say, hey, there's corrosion here that we need to fix, or there's a broken part here we need to fix. We can take some stuff off of our list to get that number right where we need to be.
So in order to make a recommendation to the council, do we need that final number, that final process to have happened?
Well, I would hope that the 383 would be approved.
Not to exceed that amount,
Right.
sort of thing? Okay.
Alderman Brown, can I ask a question? You may not know the answer yet. Public safety would be scheduled for the 3rd, but that's also National Night Out. So would you still be having the public safety meeting that night?
Yeah, I don't cancel too many. I canceled this one because of some things I had to do.
Sure.
And the city council was going to move that day anyway. Now they wanted another date delayed. I need to make a statement. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Two things. A long time ago, we discussed this whole item about refurnishing that thing in budget and in committee. It passed through committee, and we sent it on to budget. And I made a motion that basically we approve it and we send it to full council. When it got to council, there was some kind of confusion about both or one. And in the end up, we approved one instead of both. At that time, I think the bid was $325,000, but that's not here or there. My thinking is this. We can go back and forth, take it back to committee, and for the additional money, for the additional $50,000, $60,000, if that's what you want to do. We need the ambulance fix. It's going to help in our repairs. It's going to help in everything we want to do. We're not saving anything by throwing this can or kicking this can further down the road to me. It's been in discussion. You know what? Maybe I'm wrong because the new alderman on this council was not part of that. And maybe they need to be part of that. I don't know, but I'm just saying, right now, with my understanding, I'm for send it to council and let them vote yes or nay.
Yeah, I would agree. We've talked extensively about this. It's been on the radar for quite some time, even though it's not on the agenda tonight to act on. I think it'd be appropriate to include on the agenda for the next council meeting.
You want to take it on for the 19th, week from tonight?
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll put on the agenda for,
Great.
Is everyone committee-wise comfortable with that? I think Alderman Brown said it well there. Thank you. Yes.
so we'll slate that with the clerk's office and put that on the agenda then. Okay.
Anyone else have questions or comments? No? Okay, we have no need for an executive session, so is there a motion to adjourn? Motion by Alderman Lewis, second by Alderman Osinga, third by Alderman Marzak. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.